We begin today with concerns raised by the State Department this week that the Syrian government is increasing its presence in, well, Syria. State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert released a statement reading, quote, "The United States remains deeply troubled by reports of increasing Syrian regime operations in southwest Syria within the boundaries of the de-escalation zone. The United States continues to warn both the Russian government and the Assad regime of the serious repercussions of these violations and demands that Russia restrain pro-regime forces from further action within the southwest de-escalation zone." Some were quick to point out the irony of this declaration. Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, Daniel McAdams, said of the statement, quote, "What a strange warning. The United States, which illegally occupies territory of a country nearly 6,000 miles away, is warning Syria, the country it partly occupies, not to conduct military operations against terrorist organizations within its own borders." Daniel joins us now to take a more in-depth look at this news. Daniel, you charge that the entire statement released by Nauert was a lie. Let's start with the idea of the deconfliction zone recognized by the United States. How is this misrepresented in her words?
Well, it's a unilaterally declared deconfliction zone. The U.S. is the only party to the agreement. Certainly, if the Da Nang agreement, which we'll talk about maybe later, is what they're going from, the United States is the only partner. Syria is not a partner to the agreement. You can't hold another partner subject to an agreement which he or she has not signed on to. And that's simply the case here. They're making up an agreement that doesn't exist.
And what about the deconfliction zones, which were agreed upon by Russia, Iran, and Turkey in May of last year? Do they limit the Syrian government's right to conduct military operation in its own territory, as Nauert suggests?
Well, that's the only reason the deconfliction zones worked in that context, is that explicitly was stated that ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other UN-designated terrorist organizations are not subject to deconfliction. The whole purpose of the deconfliction was to pull back militarily against those that aren't non-terrorist groups, so the fight against the terrorist groups can be more effectively carried out. So it makes no sense.
You mentioned the Da Nang agreement. What is it, and how does it relate to this statement?
Well, that's another part that I think really Nauert is deceptive about. She presents the Da Nang agreement as if it was something that Presidents Putin and Trump agreed upon to bind Syria, prohibiting Syria from any activity in the southwestern zone, whereas that is not the case. You can simply read the State Department release the statement. It talks about deconfliction in the context of the fight against ISIS, which is what I said a minute ago. It's deconfliction among the partnered forces so that they can focus on taking out ISIS. The original Da Nang statement is extremely clear about this. Unless there's something else that we have not seen, it's simply a deconfliction so that ISIS and Al-Qaeda can be more effectively fought against.
Earlier this week, both Syrian and Iraqi troops fighting the self-proclaimed Islamic State near the border with Syria and Iraq reported to have been hit by an airstrike. The Syrian government originally accused the United States of carrying out the strike. However, the U.S., an official later told CNN it was in fact Israel which was responsible. What is going on in Syria at the moment, and what is the U.S. and Israeli strategy at this point?
Well, the Israelis are nervous because they have occupied the Golan Heights since the '67 war, and the fight, and they've essentially protected Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Those are the last two Al-Qaeda and ISIS pockets on the border with the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. The Israelis are nervous that the Iranian-related militia will be fighting in this sort of last battle against Al-Qaeda. The purpose of the strike, I guess, is to send a warning shot, but the U.S. has also conducted some strikes in the area, too. But what's interesting, you know, about the statement that Nauert released yesterday is for the first time she didn't warn of serious consequences. She didn't have the implicit threat of force. I don't know if there's anything that can be read into that, but it makes you wonder what they are thinking in Washington, because it seems very clear to me that Russia is absolutely committed to backing up the Syrian military's movement in southwestern Syria against these two terrorist organizations. It's the last stand.
That certainly seems clear, but what is the mission of U.S. troops in Syria at the moment, and is their presence legitimate?
Well, I would imagine some of the U.S. troops are wondering that themselves. They're sitting there without a clear mission. Obviously, the fact that they're warning Syria not to fight ISIS definitely undermines the U.S. position that it's only there to fight ISIS. If it was only there to fight ISIS, they wouldn't be telling the Assad government to not fight ISIS. It doesn't make any sense. I think they're trying to keep a fact on the ground from being a fact on the ground, and I think it's too late. You know, the Baghdad operations room is where the Syrian, the Russian, the Iranian, and the Iraqi governments met recently to coordinate that fight in the border zone. I think it's very significant. I think things are happening. I think the U.S. interventionism once again is backfiring. It's bringing these countries closer together that the U.S. was hoping to get rid of. But the other thing we would say is you talk about the Da Nang Declaration. One of the things it talks about is that the two parties, the U.S. and Russia, agree on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria. Well, in that case, if anyone is violating the Da Nang Agreement, it's the United States, which by its very presence, uninvited presence in Syria, is violating Syrian sovereignty, violating its territorial integrity. It would be the same if Syrian troops were here in Texas, for example.
Yeah, and no one would ever raise that issue, of course, in the mainstream media when talking about what's going on in Syria. Daniel McAdams, Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, we always appreciate your time.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.